Welcome to the September 2025 edition of Upfront and Real, brought to you by Ohio Cooperative Living Magazine and Ohio's Electric Cooperatives. I'm Karen Whitney, Director of Communications for Ohio's Electric Cooperatives, and with me, our President and CEO, Craig Grooms.
Good morning.
Welcome. We're talking about electricity, the price of it this summer. People got bills in the mail, whether they are a co-op member or an IOU like AEP Ohio, Duke Energy.
Yeah.
What is causing these bills?
Well, the primary driver behind the high bills is hot, humid weather, right? And so we've had a very hot, it's 65 degrees today, which is very cool. We had a nice cool front, but it's been a very hot and humid summer. So all of our power bills have been high, right? And it really just reflects the additional usage that we've all have seen to cool our homes. But it really is driven by the amount of electric that we consume, especially when it's really hot or really cold.
So outside of those extreme weather times, what else is impacting the cost of electricity these days?
So we all operate as part of this power grid. We're all electrically connected, and we've talked about that before. There's a lot of new demand that's coming on the grid, a lot of data centers that we're seeing in central Ohio and really throughout the country. We're seeing more manufacturing, more electrification, so just more uses for electricity. And the supply side, when you really look across Ohio, is not keeping up with that new demand. And so you start to see higher prices for electricity when you have more demand than supply. Fortunately for the co-ops, we own and operate our own power generation facilities. So we are able to meet the demands of our existing members. And so that's helped keep, even though we've seen higher bills, we have more control over the cost of producing electricity. When you really compare ourselves to the investor-owned utility electric companies or customers in Ohio, where they no longer really own and operate power generation facilities. They procure that generation from third parties, and that helps. It's a co-op difference, right? It's a difference between how we operate as compared to investor-owned utilities, and it's driven by owning and operating, controlling cost as much as we can, and that's really something that the investor-owned utilities don't do in Ohio.
Which, like you mentioned, co-op difference. I think that's a huge one.
It is. We're nonprofit, cost of service. So what it costs us to produce electricity, to transmit it across the transmission facilities, across the distribution facilities of your cooperative, that is the cost of your electricity, right? Compared to an investor-owned utility, they have rates set by the state. They have a profit motive. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just a different business model. And so it just really translates into, again, the cooperative difference is where we sell electricity at what it costs us to produce and to transmit, and we manage those costs on a daily basis. It's something that we're always thinking about, trying to minimize the cost. We all have and are impacted by the inflationary pressures of electrical equipment. Really across the entire economy, we've seen a lot of inflationary pressure. That impacts us. It impacts all electric utility customers and consumers across the country. And so we try to manage that as much as possible, but it still translates into sometimes higher rates than we would want.
So it really sounds like owning that generation.
Yeah.
So co-ops owning the generation really is the difference in having more stability.
Really big. It comes down to that. You look back 25 years ago, and Ohio deregulated the electric business for investor-owned utility customers. For cooperative members, we are outside of that legislation. So by deciding when to build or buy a power plant, owning and operating those facilities gives us more control of the cost of electricity. And that's something that is drastically different than investor-owned utility customers in Ohio that are dependent on third-party suppliers. We have a power grid operator called PJM that procures electricity production, and most consumers in Ohio are dependent on those mechanisms and processes, whereas co-op members have pretty much through their ownership of their co-op, through the ownership of Buckeye Power, has the rights to the electricity that we produce from the facilities that the members own.
I want to talk about supply and demand because the other thing that's impacting this that we do hear about is data centers are coming, some are already here. How are we insulated from that as co-op members? Talk about the supply-demand issue.
I would say yes and no. We are generally insulated from all these new load centers, mostly data centers, more uses of electricity, more manufacturing. Ohio is dependent on the power grid and the processes of our power grid operator, PJM, to procure generation from third-party suppliers. And so we have a lot of new demand coming on very quickly. We have less supply coming on, and so basic economics, you get more demand than supply, prices have to go up. That's where that cooperative difference really comes into play. We own sufficient generation capacity to meet the needs of our members right now. So it doesn't always mean our costs or rates are lower, but we have more control over those costs. And that's really the biggest difference right now, where we're seeing the rates that co-op members pay still might have a high bill because of a lot of electric use, but we're able to manage the cost of producing electricity, whereas investor-owned utilities in Ohio are dependent on third-party providers. And when you get a mismatch or an imbalance between supply and demand, you can see some higher rates.
Okay. Great to educate us on all that, because just knowing the why behind, hey, why is this bill higher? It helps to understand, because maybe there's things people can do in their own daily lives to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for watching us on the September 2025 edition of Upfront and Real. We'll see you next month.